Before we get on with the podcast, I'd like to mention that I now have 3 books for sale on Kindle. Recommended Reading for the True Conservative, Bad Democrat, and now Evil Liberal. All available for $3.99 or through Kindle Unlimited. Now, on with the podcast.
Kind of fat, or trying not to be fat. Either way, fat's coming. And that's all right. Don't hate on it. You know why you're fat? Because you're winners. Yeah, first generation, born at the right time, doesn't have to fight for survival. Food always within arm's reach, perfect temperature everywhere you go. Every day wake up in America, it's a perfect 72 and snacky. So yeah, we're gonna be a little chubby. Big deal. Don't hate on it. Don't hate on it. Except you. This is it, guys. You're a grown-up. You're an adult. This is what you ended up looking like. Game body of an Olympic athlete. Well, you're not an Olympic athlete. You're done from sales. You got a fat ass. You wear khakis. You hike them up when you walk. We still...
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, July the 25th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch and rules for retrogrades. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. Milton Friedman. This chicken or egg discussion is addressed perfectly by Milton Friedman. Subordinating freedom to equality means, by definition, the attempt of a disinterested third party, government, to effect a social result by some form of coercion. Equality, or any other social result, can only come about sustainably from an environment of freedom. Coercion cannot create equality, only the appearance of a temporary equality. If one truly believes in freedom, they must believe in freedom as the precursor to other social aims.
Thank you. We recognize that our needs are just as important as theirs, and we don't owe them an explanation for taking care of ourselves. When we set these boundaries with emotional detachment, it's easier to enforce them because we're no longer emotionally invested in their reaction. Another critical component of emotional detachment is understanding that we don't have to engage in every conflict the liberal tries to initiate. Liberals often beat people into arguments or emotional confrontations as a way to maintain control. They may twist our words, provoke us, or attempt to gaslight us into doubting reality. When we detach emotionally, we stop feeling the need to engage in these manipulations. We can choose to remain calm, not because we are indifferent or uncaring, but because we recognize that engaging in their emotional games only serves to give them the power they seek. By detaching, we retain control over our reactions and stop feeding into their need for drama. Emotional detachment doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means choosing not to let the liberals' behavior control our emotional state. It's about recognizing that we are not responsible for their feelings, and their inability to regulate their emotions is not a reflection of our worth or value. When we detach, we protect our own mental and emotional well-being. We stop giving the liberal the power to dictate how we feel, and we start to focus on our own needs and desires rather than being constantly at their mercy. A key element of emotional detachment is also distancing ourselves from the liberal, both emotionally and physically, whenever possible. Liberals thrive on closeness because it gives them access to our vulnerabilities. They want us to be constantly available, to be their emotional support, and to be at their beck and call. Emotional detachment requires that we learn to pull back and create space between ourselves and the liberal. This may mean limiting our interactions with them, reducing the emotional energy we invest in the relationship, or even cutting ties altogether if necessary. The less emotionally involved we are, the less power the liberal has over us. Finally, detachment allows us to focus on ourselves and our own personal growth. Liberals often consume all the energy in the room, leaving little room for our own needs and desires. Emotional detachment creates a space we need to prioritize our own well-being, rediscover our passions, and invest in relationships that are mutually respectful and supportive. This influence will free ourselves to cultivate a life that is truly our own, grounded in self-respect. You know, it's a strange thing how little we understand about manipulation, especially when it's cloaked in charm, wrapped in vulnerability, and wielded with surgical precision. Now, I'm not here to demonize anyone, but I am here to shine a light on patterns, on chaos disguised as care. One of the most deceptive tactics employed by female liberals is the use of charm as a weapon. And this isn't the simple surface-level charm we're accustomed to. It's not merely smiling or laughing at the right moments. This is calculated charisma, a type of relational camouflage, a highly adaptive strategy designed to disarm, confuse, and eventually control. And the most terrifying part is how effective it is, because it plays directly into our deepest instincts to trust, to connect, and to be needed. At first glance, these women can seem warm, intelligent, deeply empathetic. They often know how to read a room, to pick up on emotional undercurrents, and then tailor their responses to fit the ideal version of themselves that we're most likely to admire or protect. This is not genuine connection. It's mimicry. mimicry of vulnerability, of sensitivity, of support. But behind that mask lies a far colder calculation of hunger for psychological dominance, a hunger to secure a position of emotional centrality in our lives, not because they value us, but because they need to dominate the narrative. They need to be in control of how others perceive us, how we perceive ourselves, and most crucially, how we perceive them. Now, this charm isn't used indiscriminately, it's deployed with a purpose. In the beginning, they will often present themselves as incredibly attentive. They ask questions. They listen with seeming intensity. They flatter. They mirror our language, our interests, even our fears. And because most people are starved for that kind of attention, they fall. We think that we have found someone who truly gets us, someone who validates our experience, someone who cares. But what's really happening is a psychological fishing expedition. They're extracting data, emotional data. They're learning our emotional vocabulary, our trauma history, our aspirations, so they can later manipulate us with precision. That charm is the bait, and our vulnerability is the hook. Once we're on it, the power dynamic begins to shift, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. And it's so subtle, so wrapped in seemingly affectionate behaviors. But by the time the manipulation begins, we're already deeply entangled. The charm also serves another purpose. It creates plausible deniability. If we ever begin to question their intentions or behaviors, others won't believe us. After all, how could someone so lovely, so socially graceful, so emotionally articulate ever do something malicious? This is not accidental. The female liberal often curates her public image meticulously. She knows how to perform virtue. She's often involved in causes. She may be highly active in communities where empathy is currency. And yet, behind closed doors, she becomes someone else entirely. Cold, calculating, controlling. The transformation is so extreme that it creates cognitive dissonance. We start to question our own perceptions. We wonder if maybe we misread the situation, if maybe we are the problem. That confusion, that self-doubt is exactly what she wants. There's a kind of spiritual violence in this tactic because it manipulates the very qualities that make human relationships meaningful: vulnerability, trust, affection. It weaponizes those values, and once the weapon is in her hands, she doesn't need to scream or demand or coerce. All she has to do is smile. All she has to do is withdraw her approval or offer it with subtle strings attached, and you'll find yourself bending to her will without even realizing it. This is the power of charm strategically. It is a form of psychological warfare dressed up in sweetness, and it's devastatingly effective. One of the most insidious psychological strategies employed by female liberals is the weaponization of victimhood. Now, this isn't just playing the victim in a superficial way. This is theatrical suffering, that carefully curated narrative that frames her as perpetually misunderstood, mistreated, or oppressed. And what makes it so effective is that on the surface, it appears virtuous. She doesn't rage openly. She bleeds quietly, or at least appears to. And in doing so, she captures our attention, our sympathy, and most importantly, our guilt. This tactic is rooted in implicit manipulation of our moral framework. Most decent people accept an obligation to protect those who are hurting. When someone appears vulnerable, our instinct is to soften, to accommodate, to defend. That's the hook. But what we don't realize, at least not at first, is that this vulnerability is selective. It surfaces only when it benefits her, only when it redirects blame or diverts attention from her own destructive behavior. She doesn't use vulnerability to seek connection or resolution. She uses it to control the emotional field. It often starts subtly. A story about a cruel ex, an abusive parent, a toxic workplace, and we listen because who wouldn't? We offer comfort, support, and validation. But over time, a pattern emerges. Every conflict somehow places her in the same role. the innocent one, the misunderstood one, the one who tried her best even when the facts suggest otherwise. She will bend the narrative with remarkable skill, bending reality to suit her emotional needs. And if we dare challenge that story, if we raise even a reasonable objection, we're met with an overwhelming response. Tears, silence, accusations, or worse, a quiet withdrawal that signals we've hurt her. And here's where the trap closes, because our instinct is to fix it, to apologize, to overcorrect, not because we did something wrong, but because we've been cast in the role of the aggressor. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 4. Egalitarianism is evil. The retrograde must loudly announce that Christian teaching and nature are generally anti-egalitarian. This applies to both marital, sexual, and distributive, economic relations. Christianity formally rejects all types of utopianism, usually predicated on egalitarianism. In short, it is universal, even anti-natural, to expect, as today's popular culture does, a uniformity of roles and talents among human beings. Forced equality bears wicked fruits. As such, we should reject the notion of gender-neutral language, participation trophies, ties in ball games, and measures toward perfectly equal incomes among households. Instead, we should insist upon gender-specific grammar, trophies only for champions, tiebreakers in sports, and a meritocratic economy which guarantees to each his due. Only these are truly Christian and aligned with natural law. Radicals have recently changed the world by crying out, "Diversity, diversity," while simultaneously condemning all forms of non-egalitarianism. This is a bold contradiction, but it has heretofore gone unnoticed, or at least unannounced, by retrogrades. Truly healthy diversity is achieved by the widespread cultural acknowledgement of a talented natural aristoi, as Thomas Jefferson noted, and its opposite, i.e., a less talented average citizen. The retrograde announces the following economic fact of life. Certain sorts are more talented, bigger, faster, and better than others. Along similar lines, men and women comprise natural opposites. Egalitarianism is evil because it denies these basic truths of nature. Of course, two exceptional forms of modified equality do qualify as Christian: equality of dignity and of opportunity. Exceptions in the Christian arenas of matrimony and political economy, respectively. First, let's examine equality in the realm of matrimony. Men and women are naturally, unalterably disparate. By now, radicals have used the slippery concept of equality to justify the near total destruction of matrimony. Sexual equality, even more than its economic sibling, proves to be a juggernaut, engulfing everything it touches. The retrograde understands that men and women are not at all equals. Men are superior at being male, as women are superior at being female. The Christian doctrine of complementarity involves equality in dignity between men and women, but not in function or power. As a term of art, dignity stands for the proposition that all human beings, every man and woman alike, enjoys rights in the eyes of God on account of their immortal souls. Yet dignity does not accrue from merit or usefulness. On the other hand, sexual roles and talents have quite a lot to do with merit when we consider the functioning of the efficient household economy. Men were built to do some things and women to do others. Accordingly, even universal human rights, e.g., life or liberty, pertain and accrue to the two sexes differently. The manner in which men and women spend their rights should be expected to vary. In fact, men and women prove to be complementary precisely because of the natural disparity of function and power between them. A husband admires his wife's grace as she admires his efficacy. Footnote: the natural force that arises in that space of intersexual admiration may only be described as attraction, a beautiful phenomenon that cannot exist without male-female differences. The natural law ensures that, on account of stark sexual differences of body and soul, men and women have indispensably different roles to play. Thus are they drawn to one another. Women are attracted to the strength, assertiveness, and activity of good men. Men are attracted to the fealty, gentleness, and receptivity of good women. Along those lines, males attract females through leadership, just as females attract males through fealty. Natural complementarity dictates a beautiful fit between men and women. At least this was the case before radicals began attempting to pervert human sexuality in the popular mind. They did so by equalizing the sexes, or claiming to have done so. End of footnote. Everything of a sexual nature after the 1960s grew monochromatic, uniform, and bland. Radicals violated their own claimed admiration of diversity, suggesting across all cultural venues that neither the male set of qualities, power, assertion, and activity, nor the female set, fealty, gentleness, and receptivity, turn out to be sex-specific. Through lies, force, and cajoling, radicals convinced most people that culture, not nature, fabricated the sexual differences commonly observed prior to the sexual revolution. In other words, radicals popularized the lie that nature does not lay out gender roles. Sexual equality was their primary means of leveling the landscape. Women should become soldiers and pretend to like it. Men should become doddering wet nurses and pretend to like it. Like all utopian visions, sexual equality created an actual dystopia, a hell on earth. The retrograde seeks to undo this. Through truth, forceful reasoning, and cajoling, retrogrades must reverse this sweeping cultural lie by showing the joy of the disparity between the two sexes, especially in the form of healthy marriages. Our mutual differences make men and women natural partners. They make us see and appreciate one another's strengths, which are not sex fungible. Strangely enough, much of the retrograde's logic regarding the complementarian rapport between the two sexes applies with equal rigor to just economics, in a less sexy way. In the economic case, the radicals attacked the merit which generates natural economic diversity. As Pope Leo XIII reminds his reader in warning against the new socialist reconfiguration of the mutual relationship between workers and their bosses, quote, "Each needs the other. Capital cannot do without labor, nor labor without capital," unquote. The great Pope goes on to specify the danger. To remedy these wrongs, the socialists working on the poor man's envy of the rich are striving to do away with private property and contend that individual possessions should become the common property of all, to be administered by the state or by municipal bodies. They hold that by thus transferring property from private individuals to the community, the present mischievous state of things will be set to rights, inasmuch as each citizen will then get his fair share of whatever there is to enjoy. Once more, egalitarianism is evil, Pope Leo XIII reminds us. On the contrary, he makes it clear that in a robust and just political economy with reasonably fair conditions, what you reap is what you sow. Pope Leo wrote one of the most important encyclicals of all time simply by channeling the basic anti-egalitarian attitudes of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. According to Aristotle, fairness or distributive justice honors proportion. Quote, "For if persons are not equal, they ought not have equal shares." Unquote. More specifically, fairness honors geometrical proportion, unequal shares for unequal merit. Conversely, equality haphazardly honors what Aristotle calls arithmetic proportion, equal shares for unequal merit. But Aristotle deems that such egalitarianism violates justice. Thomas Aquinas, for his part, agrees, writing, "If property were equalized among the households, it would lead to a corruption of the polity. It also follows that the equalization of possessions is unsuitable from a consideration of the gradation of personages, as well as from human nature. There is a difference between citizens, just as there is between members of a body. The virtue and function of different members is different." The retrograde knows that in actuality there were two, not one, socialist errors of Russia warned against at Fatima in 1917, sexual egalitarianism and economic egalitarianism. The West has succumbed to both, although moderate right-wingers have usually picked one side or the other to spend energy in countering. Footnote: as shown clearly by the Malay at CUA debate on 9/5/19 between David French and Sohrab Ahmari, both types of non-retrograde conservative, post-liberals and classic liberals, have chosen to combat one, but not both types of Russia's errors. End of footnote. Both egalitarian errors of Russia must be undone, however. Both must be decried and defeated in the West. Retrogrades have been appointed by the late hour to be the soldiers fighting to the death this two-front war.
And that was Rules for Retrogrades, Rule 4, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Dr. Ramani.
Have you ever wondered why the kindest people are often the ones who get hurt the most? Why the people who give the most, forgive the most, love the deepest, and care the hardest are often the very people who end up emotionally exhausted? At first glance, it doesn't seem fair. Kindness is one of the most admirable qualities a person can possess. It builds trust. It strengthens communities. It allows relationships to flourish. The world needs more compassionate people, not fewer. So how can something as beautiful as kindness become a weakness? The answer is this: kindness is never the weakness. The weakness begins when kindness exists without boundaries, when compassion replaces discernment, when empathy overrides self-respect, when helping others becomes more important than protecting yourself. That is where emotionally manipulative people, and especially narcissistic personalities, often find opportunity, because healthy people appreciate kindness. Unhealthy people often expect it. And there is an enormous difference between being valued for your heart and being used because of it. Today, I want to explore why kindness sometimes becomes the very thing that keeps people trapped in unhealthy relationships, why narcissists are often drawn to deeply empathetic individuals, and how you can remain a compassionate person without sacrificing your own emotional well-being. Because healing is not about becoming less kind. It is about becoming wisely kind. Let's begin with one of the biggest misconceptions people have about kindness. Many people believe that if they're kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, eventually the other person will change. Perhaps you found yourself thinking, maybe they had a difficult childhood. Maybe they're under a lot of stress. Maybe if I love them enough, they'll finally feel safe. Maybe they just need someone who won't give up on them. Those thoughts come from a beautiful place. They reflect hope, compassion, empathy. But here's the difficult reality. Compassion cannot heal someone who refuses accountability. Love cannot replace self-awareness. Patience cannot substitute for genuine change. And your willingness to stay cannot make someone confront patterns they have spent years avoiding. One of the greatest mistakes kind people make is believing that their love has the power to transform someone who has no interest in transforming themselves. Kind people also have a remarkable ability to see potential. This is usually one of their greatest strengths. They don't judge people by their worst moments. They believe in growth. They believe in redemption. They believe everyone deserves another chance. Healthy relationships thrive because of this outlook, but narcissistic relationships often exploit it. Instead of seeing someone's consistent behavior, you begin focusing on their potential. You don't fall in love with who they are. You fall in love with who they could become. That distinction matters. Because relationships are built on reality, not possibility. Every time they hurt you, you remember the wonderful version of them from the beginning. Every apology renews your hope. Every brief period of kindness convinces you that lasting change is finally happening. But hope without evidence becomes emotional imprisonment. Another reason kindness becomes vulnerable is because kind people often assume others think the way they do. If you would never intentionally manipulate someone, you struggle imagining that someone else would manipulate you. If you're honest, you naturally expect honesty. If you're loyal, you expect loyalty. If you're compassionate, you assume compassion exists in everyone else. This psychological tendency is called projection. We naturally expect other people to share our values. Unfortunately, not everyone does. Narcissistic individuals often interpret generosity differently. Instead of seeing your kindness as something precious, they may see it as something available, something endless, something they can rely on without ever reciprocating. Let's talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people believe forgiveness means allowing someone unlimited access to your life. It doesn't. Forgiveness is about releasing the emotional burden of resentment. Trust is something entirely different. Trust must be earned. Respect must be earned. Safety must be earned. Kind people often confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. They forgive quickly, then return to the exact same environment with the exact same expectations, despite seeing no meaningful change. Eventually they ask, why does this keep happening? Because forgiveness without accountability often becomes permission for repeated behavior. One of the hidden dangers of excessive kindness is that you begin normalizing disrespect. The first criticism hurts. The second criticism feels familiar. The 10th criticism becomes expected. Gradually, your standards change. Behavior you once would have considered unacceptable now feels ordinary. You tell yourself, nobody's perfect. Relationships are hard. Everyone makes mistakes. And all of those statements are true. Healthy people make mistakes. Healthy people apologize. Healthy people grow. The difference is consistency. A repeated pattern is no longer a mistake. It becomes a choice. Kind people also have a habit of explaining away red flags. Instead of asking, why did they lie? You ask, what happened that made them lie? Instead of asking, why do they keep insulting me? You ask, I wonder what pain they're carrying. Again, empathy is beautiful, but empathy without accountability becomes dangerous. Understanding someone's pain does not require accepting their harmful behavior. You can understand someone's trauma without allowing them to create trauma in your life. Another hidden cost is emotional over-responsibility. Kind people often believe they're responsible for fixing everyone's emotions. If someone is sad, you feel responsible. If someone is angry, you feel responsible. If someone is disappointed, you immediately wonder what you did wrong. This creates a life where you're constantly scanning everyone else's emotional state. Your own emotional needs quietly disappear. Eventually, you stop asking, how do I feel? And begin asking, how is everyone else feeling? That shift slowly disconnects you from yourself. One of the most painful realities is that narcissists often reward kindness in the beginning. They praise it, admire it, celebrate it. They tell you how special you are, how caring you are, how different you are from everyone else. It feels wonderful. But over time, the admiration becomes expectation. Your generosity is no longer appreciated, it becomes required. If you help, it's expected. If you don't help, you're selfish. Notice how quickly appreciation transforms into entitlement. That transformation happens so gradually that many people don't recognize it until they're emotionally exhausted. Kind people also tend to fear conflict, not because they're weak, because harmony feels deeply important to them. They would rather absorb discomfort than create it. Unfortunately, manipulative people often recognize this immediately. They understand that someone who avoids conflict is less likely to challenge unfair treatment, less likely to say no, less likely to leave. Conflict avoidance becomes one of the silent foundations of emotional control. Another reason kindness becomes a weakness is because many compassionate people believe that boundaries are unkind. Let's challenge that belief. Imagine someone repeatedly enters your home without knocking. Would locking your door be cruel? Of course not. It would simply protect your space. Emotional boundaries work the same way. They don't exist to punish people. They exist to protect relationships from resentment. Without boundaries, kindness eventually becomes obligation. Obligation becomes exhaustion. Exhaustion becomes resentment. And resentment slowly destroys genuine compassion. One of the most important lessons I want you to remember is this. Being kind does not mean believing everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. It means treating people with dignity while also treating yourself with dignity. Some people deserve your empathy, not your trust. Some people deserve your forgiveness, not your closeness. Some people deserve compassion, not unlimited opportunities to hurt you. Recognizing that difference is not becoming cold. It's becoming emotionally healthy. As healing begins, something remarkable starts to happen. You remain generous, but you're no longer available to everyone. You remain compassionate, but you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their choices. You remain patient, but you no longer confuse patience with endless waiting. You remain loving, but you finally include yourself among the people you love. That is emotional maturity. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that kindness no longer feels heavy. You help because you genuinely want to, not because you're afraid of disappointing someone. You say yes because it aligns with your values, not because guilt demands it. You say no without carrying shame for the rest of the week. You trust your instincts. You recognize manipulation sooner. You stop making excuses for repeated disrespect. And perhaps most importantly, you understand that protecting your peace does not make you less compassionate. It makes your compassion sustainable, because the strongest kind people are not the ones who give until they have nothing left. They are the ones who understand that kindness without wisdom becomes vulnerability, but kindness guided by self-respect becomes one of the most powerful strengths a person can possess. The goal is not to harden your heart. The goal is to make sure your heart is no longer handed to people who have never learned how to hold it with care. There is another reason kindness can become your greatest vulnerability. You begin believing that enduring pain is proof of love. Think about how often society praises people who sacrifice everything for others. We're told that the best partners are the ones who never give up. The best parents always put themselves last. The best friends are always available. The best employees never complain. While there is certainly value in sacrifice, there is also danger when sacrifice becomes your entire identity. Because somewhere along the way, you may begin believing that the more you suffer, the more loving you are. But love was never meant to require the disappearance of your identity. Healthy love asks for compromise. It does not ask for self-erasure. Another hidden consequence of excessive kindness is that you become uncomfortable receiving. You have no problem giving compliments. But when someone compliments you, you dismiss it. You love helping people. But when someone offers to help you, you say, no, I'm fine. You become the person everyone depends on. Yet you rarely allow anyone to depend on you. Why? Because receiving feels unfamiliar. Perhaps you learned that your value came from what you contributed, not from who you were. Healing means learning that receiving love is just as healthy as giving it. Relationships cannot thrive if generosity only moves in one direction. Let's also talk about emotional labor. Many kind people become unpaid therapists for everyone around them. Friends call when they're struggling. Family members lean on them. Co-workers unload their frustrations. Partners expect endless emotional support. Day after day, you absorb everyone else's pain. Eventually, your own emotional tank becomes empty. And yet, because you've become known as the strong one, very few people stop to ask how you're doing. This creates a painful illusion. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel profoundly alone. Not because people don't care, but because you've unintentionally trained everyone to believe you'll always be okay. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones quietly carrying the heaviest burdens. Another weakness develops when kindness becomes your identity instead of your choice. If someone describes you as kind, that's wonderful. But if being kind becomes the only way you know how to feel valuable, You become trapped. Now, every decision is filtered through one question. Will people still like me? Not, is this healthy for me? Not, does this align with my values? Only, will they approve? Approval becomes addictive. And like any addiction, it slowly takes away your freedom. There is another pattern I see repeatedly. Kind people often ignore their intuition. Your instincts tell you something feels wrong. A comment makes you uncomfortable. A joke feels disrespectful. A promise doesn't seem sincere. But instead of trusting yourself, you explain it away. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Little by little, you stop listening to the one person who has been trying to protect you all along, yourself. Intuition isn't always perfect, but consistently ignoring it teaches your mind that your own perceptions don't matter. That is exactly what manipulative people want. Because someone who doesn't trust themselves becomes much easier to influence. Another hidden cost is that you become exhausted trying to prove your goodness. You work harder, give more, forgive faster, stay longer, love deeper. Not because it feels healthy, because you're trying to earn acceptance. Here's the difficult truth. People who genuinely appreciate you don't require constant proof. Healthy relationships don't demand endless demonstrations of loyalty. They recognize your value without requiring you to sacrifice yourself every single day. If you constantly feel like you have to earn your place in someone's life, that relationship deserves careful examination. Let's talk about the fear of being called selfish. For many survivors, that word carries enormous emotional weight. Imagine finally saying, I can't do that today. Immediately your mind whispers you're selfish. You choose to spend a quiet evening alone instead of attending another obligation. Again, the voice appears. You're selfish. You leave a relationship that has repeatedly damaged your mental health. You're selfish. Notice something remarkable. Who taught you that protecting yourself was selfish? Because emotionally healthy people don't define self-respect that way. In fact, healthy people understand something incredibly important. People who constantly neglect themselves eventually have very little left to give anyone else. Taking care of yourself is not the opposite of generosity. It is what allows generosity to remain genuine. There is also the problem of emotional debt. Kind people often keep giving because they feel responsible for investments they've already made. I've already spent 10 years trying. I've already forgiven them so many times. I've already sacrificed so much. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. The belief that because you've invested so much, you must continue investing, even when the relationship is no longer healthy. But staying simply because you've already stayed only guarantees more time will be lost. Healing sometimes requires accepting that previous sacrifices cannot be recovered, but future sacrifices can still be prevented. As you become healthier, you'll notice something fascinating. Some people become uncomfortable, not because you've changed for the worse, because the relationship has changed. The person who always answered immediately now responds when they have time. The person who always solved everyone's problems now encourages others to take responsibility. The person who never said no now occasionally declines. Some people will celebrate that growth. Others may resist it. Their reaction tells you far more about the relationship than your boundary ever could. Eventually, kindness begins to feel different. You help because your heart is full, not because guilt is pushing you. You support others without carrying responsibility for their entire lives. You love deeply, but you also recognize when love is no longer being respected. You forgive without forgetting the lessons you've learned. You remain compassionate without becoming available for manipulation. And perhaps that is the greatest transformation of all. You stop believing that kindness means saying yes to everyone. Instead, you realize that true kindness also includes honesty, boundaries, discernment, self-respect, and courage. Because real kindness isn't measured by how much pain you're willing to tolerate. It's measured by your ability to care for others without abandoning yourself in the process.
And that was Dr. Ramani. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.